Hi, I'm your host, Nate Shear, and welcome to the show. This is Mind Force, the podcast for love, life, and learning, where your mind matters. Today, we have the One Sao Command Chief. We're going to be talking about real resiliency or mental toughness. So I'd like to give you the floor for some opening comments. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
No, I appreciate it. First off, I'd like to just say thanks for inviting me to come do this. I know it's been quite a bit of a challenge to link up the timeline to get it to happen. So thanks for being persistent. I do appreciate it. So a little bit about me. Like you said, I am the One Sao Command Chief. I've been in the military now about 25 years. It'll be 25 years this summer. Career military guy, 20 years in the fire department. I did that first before doing this command chief gig. Second time doing the command chief gig. First one was in Misawa, Japan. I did that for 2 years during COVID, so that was a challenge. And then came over here and enjoyed every ride. So military brat, grew up all over the world. Don't really have a place I call home. My personal stuff, I'm married to my best friend. She was a firefighter as well. She did 10 years. She got out. She did 8 years. Sorry, she got out about 10 years ago. Got 3 kiddos. My oldest is 17. My middle guy is 13. My youngest is 11. We hope to continue the family tradition of military service. My oldest kid goes to MEPS next week. So fingers crossed that everything works well for that. Anyways, kind of grew up here locally in the Fort Walton Beach area that's right next to One Sao. I am a local kid. I graduated from Fort Walton Beach High School, and this is my third time that I'm stationed back at Herbert Field. So Florida is really, I guess, what I would call home, as close to home as can be for being a military guy.
That's funny. I kind of struggle with the same thing. Sometimes when people ask and those icebreakers and whatnot, where's home? And I've lived in so many different places. I kind of say wherever my mom's at. So I guess that's my answer right now. She's kind of the rock and the important part to me. So wherever she's at, which half the time she's with us visiting. So that's good. It's interesting. I always find it funny, like the MEPS process, kind of touching on that, like you were talking about with your son, because when I came into MEPS, I came in guaranteed air traffic, and my roommate at the time, he came in and he really wanted medical. And so he wanted to be IDMT or some type of med tech. And there was a couple other guys that were joining at the same time that we knew from school. And they had went to Skill Bridge, and they had all these certificates in fire prevention and whatnot, going down the fire route. And he got fire and they didn't. So I always kind of find it funny how the selection process comes out. These guys were well equipped, but I guess the need wasn't there at that time or whatever it was. Must have been something to do with the delayed entry program. But yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to touch on something real quick. Thanks for coming out. Like you said, we finally got connected, which is great. But one of my favorite parts of interviewing leadership, like I talked about with Josh White from Hero Front, we'd kind of discussed this. It's really cool to allow people to see you and understand you and really see the people that are behind the leadership. You see the people on the walls and, the rank on the shoulders and things like that. And, you still have to remain, respectful and things like that. But people, ultimately are people. And so I think that the cool part about this digital media is being able to demonstrate that leaders are people too. So I did see you out at the Christmas tree lighting. And so I thought it was super cool. You were running around trying to see everybody. And I'm sure you wanted to see every single person there, and probably want to see every single person face to face on base and really get a chance to know and understand the people. But that's just physically impossible. There's only one of you. And there's so many people that are out there and in different remote locations and whatnot. So I think this gives a ability to peek behind the curtain and be able to see a little bit more about you. So thanks for coming out and making sure you were seeing people, even though you're about to depart here in a few months, still getting out there and seeing everybody. But I wanted to give you a chance to ask me a question before we dive into the warm up.
Yeah, you still got me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think it's, I do agree that, social media over the last few years, I've tried to connect with quite a few folks, and it's showing them, we do have a life outside the military. And I often tell folks that, you got to find that good strike of balance. And if I'm not out there showing who I am outside the military, and you can do all the great things and be a person. And I love to be Joey as well as I love to be Chief. So I think those opportunities to go out and see people with their families and get to know them a little bit more on a personal level, those are huge opportunities. Like you said, I don't always get to see every single person, but the opportunities I have to see as many as I can is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. So do you have any questions for me before we start?
Yeah, I think I'm always fascinated by the podcasters of the world. Kind of what gets you motivated and started in this. So if you'd share a little bit about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a very active mind, and I feel like if I'm idle, I kind of go crazy. So I kind of continuously work on one thing or another. So I worked full time, active duty, up to 8 years, and got my bachelor's. Was lucky enough and blessed enough to be able to commission, and then took a year break to really learn my job and make sure I understood that. Then got my master's, moved in, got my PMP. Those were like big milestones that I really wanted to check off the list. And then at that point, I needed something to work on, keep myself busy before I drive my wife crazy. And so I really wanted to write a book, but I realized I really need to play to my strengths. And I've been talking way too much my whole life. So it's funny. We moved this last summer here to Hurlburt, and we drove cross country because we picked up our car from my sister in Vancouver, just outside of Seattle. And so we brought that car all the way down. And while I was home, I took a quick peek at my report cards, and just hilarious that they all say, joy to have in class, but talks way too much. And I always thought it was funny because they try to move me, which just was always comical. Like, I'll talk to anybody. So you put me next to him or her or Billy or Sally or whatever, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to keep on talking. So I figured I should try to play to my strengths. And it is a nervous thing. And it is, kind of crazy putting yourself out into a public forum. But I feel like at some point you just have to kind of take the leap. And so I did reach out to Josh White, speaking of him earlier. He runs the Hero podcast out at Eglin here. I reached out to him from Okinawa, Japan. I missed him once. And then the second time he picked up, and just amazing how there's so many good people out there. Told me what he uses and how he works through it, and gave me the whole lowdown as I'm going into a battle rhythm thing for an exercise. I think there was like a WIT meeting that morning. So I'm like driving to WIT. I got all my gear like about to be put on, and talking to Josh on the way in. So good people out there can really help you, ease the transition, because it is a little scary. But knowing people are just there and wanting the best for everybody, and not even competing, which I think is really cool. I've talked to a lot of different people in this space, and no one's ever really like tried to put me down or anything. Give me ideas, give me feedback. And even though we're in the same space, I think everyone just wants the best for everybody. And especially being in the mental fitness mind space, I think it's a little difficult because it's something that's hard to talk about, but we need to talk about it. Yeah. So we'll have some serious conversations and keep moving forward.
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, I've seen his podcast. He's been out there quite a bit, putting himself out there. So I appreciate all the perspectives that he brings as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the core of the whole thing is just trying to work on and become better people. And I feel like we do a really good job of that in the human bodily physical form, right? So we have the different pillars and things like that, and we'll work out and we'll talk about reps and sets. And, as people are walking around, I'm doing back and buys today. But no one, really, I mean, I think we're getting a little closer, but I don't hear a lot of like, I'm going to sit in the park and meditate. Like, that doesn't really happen, but that should be the same thing. Like, how are you finding ways to better yourself? So today, talking about that resiliency. So it's just these things, you just put more tools in the toolbox. You'd rather have the tool before you need it.
Yeah, it's resiliency. We've been talking about it in the military for quite some time. And what fascinates me, and I think what I'm trying to understand better and better, is the, changing generations and how different generations become more resilient, maybe easier than others. But I think that's where sometimes we struggle in the military, is trying to understand the needs of all of our, we got quite a few different generations serving in the military between our civilians too, in some sort of capacity. So how are we taking best care of our members? And until we understand how we all recharge, whatever that looks like, I'm always just out there trying to get more information.
That's a good point. Yeah, I remember when I was at Edwards, a lot of people stayed there for the longest time. We'd be getting people having their 30 and 40-year pins. They worked at one single location for 40 years. And so that person is wildly different than, someone that grew up and came up through COVID. So that's a really good point.
True.
So I'd like to move into the warm-up. I'm going to steal a few questions from my interview with the Shogun Chief, Command Chief Ronnie Woods. That was a great time. But I liked a few of those questions, and it kind of fit with yours as you're going to exit here. So the first question, reflecting back on your time, what were the highs and lows during this assignment?
During this particular assignment, I mean, the lows, to be honest with you, the reality of what we do from time to time and the amount of people that serve with us, losing people, right? So it's not just, recently with the Gundam 22 folks, it's with, we live on a busy highway. Unfortunately, those type of things happen. So some of those lows are helping people navigate through those things. And it's just the life stuff that we deal with when you have thousands of people that you're working with. So those were definitely lows. The highs have been week to week and day to day. I mean, it's not a high necessarily isn't something that you feel super like you achieved something great. It's someone telling you said something and they took it back. It's that note that you have on your desk that somebody left for you that said, "Hey, thanks for thinking of me," or "Thanks for, recognizing me," or "Thanks for what you said this one time. It, changed the path of my life." So those highs come so often. So really there hasn't been a culminating high in this particular assignment, but a bunch of little ones that just keep my bucket full.
That's interesting too. I feel like there's a lot of times where you don't even know either. I remember I had an incident where I was out of Kadena and I was the flight commander of logistics out there. And so I had a larger flight and we were going through COVID, like you had mentioned, a lot of challenges with that. And so the rules were changing so rapidly with quarantine and where you could go and what you could do. We had, different quiet time hours and whatnot. And so the best thing I could come up with is every Friday we'd meet real quick and I try to get the information out before the weekend because sometimes it would change throughout the week and I didn't want people to get in trouble. So we do that and I'd end the meeting every time with "I love you all." And I know like that term kind of freaks people out, but I think there's different, forms of love, obviously your spouse and your kids and things like that. But wanting the best for everyone is really, I think all that boils down to. And so we had a guy, he ended up admin separating, but he caught me right outside the holiday party as he was leaving on his last day. And his brother had passed away and his brother was his best friend. He said, "I was in one of the darkest moments of my life. And, you telling me, that you loved me was really important and helped me get through that." And, that was a year before that, a year. So a year, I didn't know. I just went out there and was trying to do the best that I could. And sometimes you don't get any feedback or it's super delayed feedback, but you just have to do the right thing.
Yeah. And I feel sometimes what I worry about more often than not is, words and actions are so powerful. You'll often hear about times where you made an impact like that, where you got it right, where you said something that it resonated with somebody and they thought about it, and had the courage to tell you about it a year later. But in that same vein, some of our words in a negative light can stick for quite some time. And normally we don't get that feedback.
Mm-hmm. And you didn't mean anything by it, more than likely, right?
You didn't mean anything by it, right? So that's what I've noticed in these positions as I've, climbed with a little bit of more folks that I'm in charge of, an opportunity to speak to a lot of people. Is just words really matter. And you got to be super calculated in what you say, because taking it the wrong way, again, you can turn somebody off pretty quick, or maybe they're having a bad day. You're going to make them have a worse day just by some words that are poor choice by you. But yeah, good point.
Yeah, that it's interesting too, because one thing I was going to mention earlier, we just had the helicopter crash there in Southern California, and then the Gundam as well. And one thing that just always drives me nuts, and maybe it shouldn't, and I should just let it go, but every time it comes out in the news, it always says routine training. Like, there's nothing routine. If you can possibly lose your life at work, that's not a routine day. That's not like scanning papers. That's not, routine just doesn't feel right. It feels like it's trying to be minimized in that thing. If you can lose your life, that's something else.
Yeah, good point.
So I'd like to ask a few questions about mental health, because that's kind of the focus of the podcast. So did you have conversations about mental health growing up? Was that a part of your life?
No, I don't feel like we really triangulated that term or resiliency. Like, I feel like growing up, that wasn't a thing. And not that we didn't care about mental health, or not that we didn't do some of the same things we're doing now to take care of one another. It's just, I think as probably a country and maybe as a world, we just didn't key into what we were actually doing and maybe some of the negative impacts of not doing some of those things. So, mental health, when I was growing up was maybe a conversation with my dad about something, conversation with my big brother about something. And it wasn't necessarily, well, I'm having this conversation because I'm having some mental health issues. It's just things we did to cope with our problems. And as I think we grew as a country over the last couple of decades, I think we have focused on it, but I just think we're terming it as something different. But I don't think that we've ever thought mental health was not a concern. It's just you have clinical mental health things, and then you have feel good mental health things that have been all around us for a long, long time.
Absolutely. And I think one core thing I've mentioned on other episodes, but, I'll continue to foot stomp it, is that continual care, trying to take care of things before they become the worst day. I made the joke in another one. Can you imagine go to the gym and just run on the treadmill once? Like, no, you do it 3 times a week and you make sure your cardio is okay. You don't just wait until it's really bad and before you start working on it. So definitely schedule some appointments or however you recharge and keep up with it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask one random question just to throw a wrench in it. What are your thoughts on warrant officers?
Well, that's funny. I just got that question yesterday from a young airman, and if there's opportunities for us to serve in a different capacity, I mean, our other services have been doing it for quite some time. We dabbled in the Air Force a little bit about, I don't know how many years ago, when we had enlisted pilots for RPAs and such. So I think there is definitely an appetite for certain AFSCs or certain jobs that maybe are harder to fill, that require a little bit more, I don't even want to say leadership skills, but a little bit more authority that enlisted won't be able to do, to where we give that authority and it'll be at the warrant officer program. I'm really curious to see what and how they roll it out, if they do roll it out. I'm going to go to AFA this week, next week, and we'll see if it's a topic of conversation. But I think people get confused sometimes about the warrant officer programs, and they just think, if you're an enlisted member and you got some degrees, you're going to be a warrant officer. And I don't think that's the point of the program. I think certain, like being a fire guy, I don't know. And again, this is just Joey Meininger's opinion, not Chief Meininger's opinion. But I don't know that we need warrant officers in the fire department. Like, we have enlisted members and senior enlisted leaders that have been doing it for quite some time. Most of them are degree holding positions, but I don't believe we need more authority than we already have and what's been given to us through directives and policy. So I don't think it fits in our AFSC. And so the challenge is going to be to find which AFSCs and which jobs those warrant officer positions actually fit into.
Are there ones that jump out at you that would be at the top? I mean, not that we can decide, right? But
yeah, I mean, RPA pilot is the one, right? Like, that's the one to me. And if we start, I mean, the Army, you fly helicopters as a warrant officer. As we start looking at different platforms, I saw an article the other day about a new helicopter training squadron that just got stood up. That could be an option. I mean, do we dabble into some of our pilot shortages with warrants too? Like, if you look at aircraft, maybe the navigator on the aircraft could be a warrant. I don't know.
That's interesting. I'm curious with the total in strength and not being able to grow, where the slots come from. I guess they'd be pulled from CGOs and senior NCOs.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move into the main topic for today. So, mental toughness for young adults. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, I guess, an intro into resilience. I feel like it's kind of become a buzzword. It shows up at all the commanders' calls. Can you share a personal story with us about a challenging situation and how you kind of fought through that difficult situation?
Yeah, I think, I've got tons of stories of fire stuff in my career that have been, challenging situations where resiliency comes into play and you just gut through it. But I think I think initially what had us talking in the first place was kind of my crazy week of things that I had fitness wise, and a lot of that was mental toughness and resilience. And I'll kind of walk through that week real quick. I didn't really say it in my intro, but I love physical fitness, and not just fitness. I just love challenges. So if I don't have a challenge or something that I'm aiming towards, I just find myself in a routine or a rut where I'm kind of doing the same thing every day, maybe not pushing myself out of my comfort zone. So for my 42nd birthday in November, I decided I was going to go run a 50K. And I've never, up to that point, probably when I made the decision 3 or 4 months prior, I've never ran a marathon. I think I might have ran 10 miles or something in my life before that. Totally wasn't planned. Like, I just woke up in the morning, and when I ran those 10 miles, just kind of ran it. You can see my route was all over the place. So I deliberately decided that I was going to try to run a 50K because I just figured that was harder than a normal marathon. And as I started training up to that 50K, that goal looked like it was pretty achievable. And I didn't think that it was pushing me enough outside of my comfort zone. So probably six or so weeks before it, I was like, okay, this whole week is going to be a crazy week. And I do a lot of Murphs too. I usually do one or so a week. I decided that I was going to do a 50K on a Monday, a triple Murph on a Wednesday, a 10K Thursday and Friday, and then drive down to South Florida and do three Spartans over the weekend. And I know it's crazy. And the reason why I wanted to do it in that particular order was I felt that if I got the hardest thing knocked out, it would be the hardest thing to do the next day and get up and keep going. If I waited to do the 50K at the end and work my way up progressively with easier events, then it wouldn't have been as tough. So I wanted to start off the week completely drained. Like, everything I had was in the 50K. So everything after that 50K was just hard. That's all it was. And so that was my plan. So I went into the 50K, everything worked. During the 50K, I had some pain in my knee, and I wore a brace. My wife took care of me. She came out and brought me a brace in the middle of the run. And what had happened is my foot overcompensated for my knee and my hamstring injury. So my foot was pulling up more each step, which doesn't sound like a big deal. But if you do it for 30 plus miles, it's a big deal. So I found myself on the Tuesday, which I already had intended on taking a rest day, in severe pain where I can barely walk. And I looked at the rest of the week, and again, I already had I was going down south to do the other races. Like, it was happening. I just didn't know, how it was going to happen. And the Wednesday came around where I was going to go do the 3 Murphs in the morning, and I hobbled out of bed, and my legs still hurt. Of course, I took some Motrin and all that stuff, and I didn't know how I was going to do all those Murphs in a row that day. I didn't understand, like, how it was going to happen, but I couldn't let myself give up and fail. Like, I thought, you know what? I just have to drive to the gym. Like, that's the first step. So I did all my things like I normally do in the morning. Ate a little meal before I worked out, drove over there. And the whole time I'm driving, I'm thinking to myself, like, how I can't even barely walk. Like, how am I going to get it done? And, but I put my vest on, I just did all my stuff, and I started walking on that track. And I probably walked about a quarter of a mile. And I was like, okay, I got a quarter mile in. I mean, only 5 miles and 5 3/4 left, right? Because that's what the triple Murph ended up being, the 6 miles. And I just didn't stop. And when you're in the moment, you don't think about it. You're just trying to get to the next thing. Like, what's the next thing? So to me, I was like, after this quarter mile, I'm going to try to at least heavily walk for a quarter mile. And eventually I ended up that 6 miles with a slow jog. And I still finished, I think, 3 hours and some change total. And then it was like that for the rest of the week. It was every day waking up. How am I going to do another 10K the next day when I can barely walk? How am I going to do it again? my whole 7 or 8 hour trip down to Sebring, Florida, I'm driving thinking like I can barely push the gas pedal. How am I going to start this Spartan? And it was the same thing every day. I just wake up like I normally do. I put my brace on, I tighten it. Each day I was getting more and more swollen. But I finished it. And, even inside those Spartans, there was challenge. It was like this whole week was supposed to happen to me to see how tough I was. Even during my long Spartan, when it was like an 18 miler, I had trained for that for quite some time. And so I brought all the gels and all the salts and all the electrolyte stuff I needed. And, my plan was to do that every 3 or 4 miles. On mile 3, when I went to do my first kind of rehab, for lack of better terms, on my nutrition, all my stuff fell out of my pocket. So there was nothing, and I had 15 miles left. And well, what are you going to do, right? Like, you're not going to quit. I already drove all the way down there, like I'm going to do it. And that's the key to I think to all resilience, right? Like, sometimes we don't know how we're going to get something done, and we can sit back. Like, I could have sat in my car that morning and I could have stared at the track and like, hey, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I could have called for help and said, hey, what do I do? If I called a doctor, they'd probably say, stop doing what you're doing. But it just takes the first step, right? Like, and then you realize, okay, my foot's not going to fall off. Like, I'm not going to do irreversible damage. Like, it's okay. And I think too often, whatever adversity we face, it's too daunting. And we look at it and we're like, I don't know how to tackle this. I don't know how to get out of this hole. And we just kind of sit there and we stare at it. And we hope that someone's going to help us out or reach a hand in or whatever it may be. But a lot of times it's on us to just try. You got to try something. And I think that's where we fail too often in being resilient is some adversity is a lot and it's challenging and we just don't think we can get out of it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And something that I just find odd is it seems like people want resiliency, but they don't want the hard work that goes into it. You don't get it for free. You don't get it easily. It doesn't magically show up on your door. And it makes me think of two things as you were talking through that. I remember an interview with a person going through Navy SEAL training, and I wish I could remember his name, but they were asking him how he got through. And he was saying, I just thought of the next meal. That was his thing the whole time. He's like, get to lunch? Okay, cool. And he's freezing. He's on the beach, just like, worst day of your life, worst hour of your life. He's like, okay, I'll just get dinner and then breakfast. And so he just next meal. And so that was one thing I thought of. And the other thing I thought of was, I think it's James Clear, Atomic Habits. I think that's his name. That book, I really like one thing that he mentions in there is you make a decision, one way or another. You don't really remain the same. Remaining the same isn't really a thing. So you either make the choice or the decision to get out of the car and start running the race, or like you said, sit in the car and, like regress and go the other direction. Like, I think a lot of times people think if we just sit and do nothing, like nothing will happen. But I don't really believe that. I think what he kind of brings up in the book is more accurate. You either get better or you get worse. Those are the only two options. There's really not a lot of remaining, with diet and exercise and things like that. If you do nothing, that's not doing nothing, it's regressing. And so you got to make the choice to go the other direction. So that's a good example.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, for me, go ahead.
No, you can go.
Yeah, I think for me, I struggle when I see people doing nothing. And that's where, like, I feel like often the first step in being resilient is what can you do on your own? Like, what is it that you can do without help, period? Like, what do you have the heart and drive to do by yourself? And there are certain things you cannot do by yourself. I will say that 100%. But what can you do by yourself? And sometimes I feel like if we don't allow people to make those first steps by themselves, they'll always rely on somebody else to make it for them.
And I think it's an important thing to bring up is it diminishes, right? So back to people want the resiliency. You get the resiliency from accomplishing and tackling the difficult thing. I'm turning from the phone, but turning back and looking and saying, hey, I did that. So if you do have someone, like you said, there's some things that you will need to ask for help and things like that. But that pride and sense of accomplishment is going to be higher if you did it. I mean, if you have to have that assistance, of course, but if you want to build true resiliency and not what you hear about a commander's call or buzzwords or things like that, that's accomplishing something that's difficult and getting on the other side and realizing I did it. That's fine. I can do it again.
Yeah. And I think, it's a spectrum, right? You have a spectrum of what you need to get yourself out of that position. And I use this analogy pretty often. You have to figure out on that spectrum the least amount of help you need to get you out of the problem. And the analogy I use is working out. If you're on the bench press and you have hundreds of pounds on there and you lower it and I just come immediately rip it off of you, if we look at the spectrum, that's all the way on this end of the spectrum, you're never going to get stronger. If I give you just enough pressure to keep that thing moving on your own, you're going to get stronger. And so I think when we are getting the help we need, it is what can you do by yourself? And then how much help do you need? But you have to be all in.
Yeah, that's a really, really good example. So I'd like to kind of move in and try to digest a little bit the age piece. So reflecting back on your own journey as you've grown up and things like that, how important or crucial is age playing in the development of resiliency? Or is it different generations? You'd kind of touched on that earlier, older civilians and different categories and things like that. How does age kind of play into this? Or is it just trying to find what works for what people?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's what works for what people. And I think the age plays a major role in it, but it's not the role in generational differences. I mean, obviously, my 11 and 13-year-old are different than I was when I was 11, 13. But I'm way more resilient now at 42 than I was at 17. And I think that it's just age. It's life experience. It is, sometimes when you ask a 17-year-old, some 17-year-olds had some really rough challenges throughout, those 17 years. But as you age and you are faced with more and more adversity and you see more and more adversity and you see some of the challenging things in life and you're exposed to it and you see people come out of it, like you become calloused. And that calloused mindset is what makes you resilient. And it's not, I can't quote this, but I guarantee there's a lot more people in their 40s and 50s doing marathons than 17-year-olds. It's because they're calloused. They have a calloused mind. A 17-year-old is obviously more healthy and their joints aren't going to hurt, but they're going to stop after a couple laps because it sucks, right? Like running that distance is not fun. I mean, I guess for some people it is, but I think as you age, you realize like, hey, okay, this is challenging. I'm going to get something out of this. And the younger you are, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a good point. I had Laura on one of my initial episodes, and she gave an analogy for resilience, which is probably my favorite one because I've heard the rubber band a lot in the military, and it's always bouncing back, but I never really understood or didn't feel like it applied very well. But she referred to resiliency as paper plates. And so you earn a paper plate every time you go through a difficult situation or you do something difficult, or like to your point, you see something difficult and see people come out the other end. And so you build up those paper plates. So if you just have one paper plate because everything's been fairly smooth in your life, then you put a big bowl of spaghetti or something on there, that plate's just going straight to the ground. But you've built up those layers of paper plates from the situations and things you've been through. And then you can take a hefty meal on that stack of paper plates. But that's the difference. And that helped me, I think, see it a lot better and a much better visual.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it's through time. I mean, I again, to be clear, I don't want to take away that we have 17-year-olds and 15-year-olds and 12-year-olds that have a lot of paper plates. Like that's a fact. But me in particular, I had a pretty easy childhood, so I didn't face much adversity coming up, and even throughout my military career, like minus challenging emergencies and stuff like that, there wasn't a lot of, I've been pretty fortunate to have a pretty what I consider normal life with not a lot of things that have really got me to negative places. So yeah, that analogy is pretty spot on.
So I'd like to ask about emotional resiliency. You'd kind of touched on, you're older and running the marathon, or I guess ultra marathon at that number of miles. And so as you're going through that, you have the brace on, things like that. So you have, some limitations there in the physical aspect, but what's the inner monologue, or what's kind of going through your head as you're moving through these difficult things, and something that someone could take and use that actionable, this week?
Yeah, I think it's just the decision you make to not quit. And I think, you can maybe, I knew going out there, maybe I was going to be slow. Maybe there'd be a little bit more pain, but I wasn't going to quit. And that's the biggest part of, I had an opportunity to go to basic training last week, and got to see all the new recruits. And we spent a little bit of time in naval special warfare, where I watched some folks that are assessing through, whatever, either TAC-P combat controller or SEER or pararescue. And I got to watch a little bit of their evolutions, but I watched some water stuff. And water is a great equalizer of everybody in these accession courses. And I watched one of the guys during the evolution. I heard an air horn, and I didn't know what that meant. And I asked the colonel next to me, I was like, "What's going on?" They're like, "Oh, that guy he quit." And I was like, "What do you mean he quit?" He was like, he just quit. He said he had enough. I'm like, what? I don't even understand that. Like, how is that an option? Like, how do you quit? And again, I'm not the guy that's in the pool getting all the water shoved down my, head and all that stuff as they're teaching me how to deal with water in a crazy environment. But I think that's the mindset. I think it's, your body is a machine. Your body will quit when it needs to quit. Like, if you're tired and you're running, like, your body you will pass out if you're not getting the oxygen you need to your brain. That will happen. And I'm not saying you run until you pass out, but like, your brain and your willpower to do something shouldn't be your limiting factor. And I feel like oftentimes that is the limiting factor, because people think they can't. Like that airman, or whoever he was, he may not have been an airman out there that day. I assume he was. His mental toughness is what made that decision that day.
Yeah, that's difficult, isn't it?
It is very difficult.
So I'm curious. You had touched on, getting out of the car, running the marathon, and making the choice, but these all sound like choices that a person can make. What advice or tips do you have where, there's external things, the world, there's so many different things. You briefly touched on, the adversity of, some 17-year-olds already have a lot. And so what is your advice, and where it's not as much in your personal control?
Yeah, I mean, we're all dealt different hands. But at the end of the day, there are going to be things that are outside of our control. But I think it just goes back to those decision points, is like, the one thing you can control is your actions. That's it. Your actions. And I'm not saying that every time, you're faced with a crazy situation or adversity, you just smile and keep moving forward, because that's not the answer either. Sometimes you need time. You need time to heal. You need time to really process what's going on with you. But then you have to make that deliberate decision to do something. And like, it all starts with that particular decision. And, at the end of the day, whether it be a decision of getting out of the car, whether it be a decision of, conquering whatever adversity that you have facing you right now, you have that decision. And it may be a decision today or tomorrow, the next day, but if you never make the decision, you're never going to move forward.
Absolutely. What do you think the biggest challenge you've overcome in your mental fitness?
Really, like I said, I've been extremely fortunate my whole life. I haven't had like a super low moment. I haven't had things, like I said, the most stressful times I've ever had, I've put on myself. Either things I volunteered for or making myself uncomfortable in situations. Like I chose most of the stress that I've had. I mean, there's a few calls throughout a 20-year career in the fire department that have caused me quite a bit of stress that I've got on the other side of, and not all of them worked out the way I needed them or wanted them to work out. But that's just kind of the way it is. But it's never put me in a state to where I felt like I'm at this really, really low point and I need to climb out. I mean, I'm a pretty optimistic person though. So, again, although I've been very fortunate, maybe some of the things that I've been exposed to are some of the things that have been part of my life would maybe be different with other folks. But normally whenever bad news comes, I'm not usually mad more than one sleep. That's the rule I kind of have. Like if you're mad, if you're frustrated, give it one sleep. And after one sleep, you got to do something.
That makes sense. So it sounds like you seek out, those challenges based on, kind of how you're set up and raised and things like that. But I'm curious, besides seeking out uncomfortable situations intentionally, what are some other proactive ways you believe younger adults can intentionally expose themselves to challenges for personal growth?
Yeah, I mean, if you're not seeking it out, it's going to come to you. That's a fact. And do you entertain those or do you not? I can't tell you the amount of times where someone asked me to do something uncomfortable. I mean, it would probably blow your mind, but I publicly speak a lot, and I despise it. Like, I do not like it at all. But I will never tell anybody no. If they're like, "Hey, we speak at this event," sure. And I usually do pretty well, but it's the preparation. It's am I going to pick the right words? Am I going to make the impact that I want to make? But I think if you're not looking for it, there are opportunities that are going to find you. And that's where I think we can grow the most from, if we're not looking for it. And I think reflecting back too, and I think, some of our younger folks, they may have been faced with a lot more adversity than they knew. But maybe they just reflected and maybe it was around them. Like, I think we do a good job as parents of shielding our kids from adversity that maybe they don't need to face, either like hard lifetimes, maybe financial problems, maybe those type of things. But I guarantee, like, as a young adult, if you talk to your mom or dad or grandma or grandpa and say, "Hey, like I tell you right now, I said I had a pretty good life, right? Like I had a pretty good growing up. I didn't feel like I wanted or needed anything." Well, as I reflect back on my youth, I have an older brother. He's a year older. My dad joined the military. My mom took care of us. They were young. He was 19. She was about 19 as well, with two kids, and he's an airman. He faced adversity. He probably had challenges to make sure that we were taken care of as well as we were. I never saw it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I think a lot of times to have those conversations, and when I brought up adversity and our youth, I was an individual that gave me some feedback, was like, "Hey, I never understood how much adversity my grandma went through until I really had those grandma talks on the back porch." And are those still happening, right? So for our young folks that maybe think that they haven't faced too much adversity, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents. I guarantee those stories, you probably face more adversity than you thought.
That's interesting. I find it hilarious, the public speaking thing, because I tell people that I'm like, I don't really like to be in front, but I talk so much. They're like, oh, that's completely shocking. I like to have conversations, but in
Yeah.
front of people, it's a whole nother thing. I'm curious, what is your thought or advice on imposter syndrome? Because I think that seems to be, I don't know if it's just more because we're identifying it and talking about it more, but I think that does seem to happen a lot. So back to your concept of when someone comes and asks you to do something, if that initial thought is, I'm not sure I'm equipped, I'm not sure I could do that. And so maybe it's not turning it down for the sake of turning it down, but turning it down because of a lack of like courage. How do people get through that? Just step forward.
Yeah, I think I love talking about imposter syndrome because I felt it so many times in my career. Normally, if you look at a trajectory of someone's career, especially in these type of positions, they work at the flight for a little bit, they work at a squadron, they work at a group, and then they transition up. And I moved from the fire department to the wing. So from a flight to the wing. And the first time I remember, and there's a meme and I love it. The first time I remember sitting at like the wing table as the wing chief, the meme is a picture of everybody sitting around the table and they're all in suits. And then there's Big Bird in there. Like, I totally felt like that because I'm like, dude, I'm outside of my element. I have no clue what they're even talking about. But what I've realized is there's not a whole bunch of difference between where I was and in the past and where I was sitting at that table that day. Like it's a little bit of experience, a little bit of sets and reps, but nobody goes into any position knowing what they're doing. And we have to get better at talking about that. I get vulnerable all the time with this. I'll tell people I had no clue what I was doing. I think that the folks that get in these positions for the first time and really think that I know what I'm doing 100%, I think those are the risky ones. I think the ones who actually admit that, hey, I don't know this and it's okay not to know this. But imposter syndrome, I think once you get into those circles and you realize like you're just as good as everyone else is, or else you wouldn't be there. That's the important part is the more and more I was exposed to those opportunities, the more confidence it gave me of like, hey, I do belong here. And, it's still every new table I sit in, I'll feel like Big Bird for a day or two. And then I'm like, all right, it's time for me to do my thing and I belong here.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember got my commission. So, staff sergeant, have like 3 to 5 troops and then, go to HSA, our tech school for Health Services Administration, and then come back and they hand me 20, I think it was 24 blue folders. Like, oh, what are these? And it was all the appointment letters and I had my name on them. So they're like, you're an expert on anti-terrorism, unit deployment manager, security, a long list of things. So I don't know anything about any of these things, non-prior medical, and now my third group. So yeah, just completely crazy. But one thing, I forget if I read it or heard it, but I think it's something that I kind of put on my mantra in the back of my mind and try to, pull on it when I need it. But it was talking about the people that selected you, interviewed you, talked, through your process and got you to where you are. If you don't believe in yourself, you're almost in a way like disrespecting them. You're like, oh, you don't even know what you're talking about. You selected me, you picked me, but if I'm not supposed to be here. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting spin on it, kind of turning it the other way. These people have groomed you, talked to you, mentored you, interviewed, long list of different things to get to these different positions. And so to be like, oh, I don't believe in myself, I'm not really supposed to be here. You're almost like spitting on them. Like, I don't know what they were talking about. Why'd they pick me? And so I think back to the people that helped me along the way and whatnot. I'm like, I don't want to disrespect them. So I do feel awkward sometimes, like you said, for a day or two, but I got to do the best I can because they believed in me and they picked me. So,
yeah, confidence is key. To get up there. And that's the one thing as you get higher in these leadership positions. I mean, I know for a fact I can't be Big Bird forever. Like, I'm not going to lead anybody as Big Bird. So you got to be confident in your abilities, and it's okay to be like that for a couple of days, but that's humble, right? And it's humble to admit that you don't know about anti-terrorism or whatever it is, the papers you sign. But it's very humble when you ask that staff sergeant or that senior airman that is an expert in it that says, "Hey, like, tell me about this program because I don't know." Because you're not expected to know everything, and I think that is. I've been very comfortable the last few years to raise my hand and say, "Hey, what's that acronym?" Like, I don't even know what that means. And what I find more often than not, like as soon as I ask, like four
Three
people
other
turn
people
their
in
head.
the room.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh, I don't know either." Well, why don't you want to admit it?
Oh, that's so funny. I've seen that on Simon Sinek. He mentions that too. Like he said, I'll be the dumb one that asks the question. And then, 5 other people like, oh, that is a good question. Like, why didn't you? So funny. No one wants to be the one looking silly, I guess. It's such an odd thing with our, A-type personalities and the people that join the military and whatnot. That's a whole other episode, I guess. But it's interesting how we don't want to look a certain way. So we maintain something that doesn't even need to be maintained.
Yeah.
So we had touched on, inner individual type resilience and things like that, being able to take that first step and just move in the right direction. But I'd like to hear from you. Where do you see role models and mentors and things like that that can help, positively influence and help that person navigate challenges? How does the role of the mentor or the role model fit into resiliency?
Yeah, I think it's when I think about the role model or mentor, going back to that lifting weight analogy, they're your spotters. They're the ones that are giving you what you need to continue to move. And sometimes that's honesty. Sometimes that's tough love. And I think that it's funny. This week I had an opportunity to talk to some of our partner nations and different commanders from our partner nations, and they asked me about the role of a mentor, not even just in resiliency, but just in general. But I think that's another buzzword that we can probably do a whole nother podcast on as well, a mentor. But I think more often than not, we get the term confused. Mentor. To me, a mentor is somebody that knows your inner thoughts. They know your strengths, your weaknesses. It's somebody you're going to be able to get vulnerable with. It's somebody that you're going to lay out all the truth on. It's because a lot of times when we want help out of situations, we're still holding something inside. It's a thought. It's something that is just because we all have secrets. We all have something that we hold internal to us, and that's just the reality of being a human being. But what is that mentor? Like, how close can you get to that mentor to release as many of those secrets as possible for your feelings, so that way they understand exactly where you're at. So that way they can give you the spot that you need to get out of your situation. Now, I think a mentor should not automatically run in and save the day every time. That is not good. I think that they should. I mean, I have a few folks that I guess that I would coin the term that I do mentor. But usually I'll listen first. I'll hear their story, and I'll give them those hard questions. I'll ask, like, well, tell me what you did again. Like, let's walk through that. And I think that that's the role of helping face adversity, is when you're facing challenges, the individual who's facing the challenge, in order to get moving in that first step, a lot of times we don't take accountability like we need to. So what did I do here? Like, has the world just come down on me because I have bad luck? And that's all the adversity that I face is because of my terrible luck. And sometimes it is, right? But I think a lot of times we create our luck. And, if we don't start owning some of those decisions and we don't start taking accountability for our actions, then we're going to find that mentor always reaching in to help somebody out. So it kind of starts at that level, I
think. So you see it as more of a blend, mentor / coach, being able to kind of help through situations instead of the savior.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Um, so since this podcast is focused on mental fitness, what's a actionable tip someone listening right now, not yours specifically, but just in general, what's an actionable tip someone could take this week and put into their life to improve their mental fitness?
I think taking the time. I think taking the time to really focus on where you're at. I don't think we slow down enough. I think that we are all busy. And when we're not busy, we're doing something that makes us busy. We're on our phones, we're in front of a screen. I find more often than not, we don't have quiet time. And I think, you may be facing more adversity than you know, and maybe it's just going to continue to compound until it becomes too much for you, because you don't take the time to sit back and reflect exactly where you're at. So, it's funny. I would never thought, and I'm not in it yet, but like meditation and stuff really, really interests me, because it's that just escape. It's just you. It's your thoughts. Where are you at right now? It's your opportunity to become grounded, to be able to determine which step you have to take in that direction. But if you don't take that time, I think that you'll be missing things that are bubbling in the background.
Absolutely. So you got the change of command coming up on the, I think, 28th. So what does the future look like for you?
So I am retiring as well. I have about 4 months or so left. We'll see what that looks like. I'm gonna move to Jacksonville. There's a lot of opportunities over there. We'll see kind of what I get into. I'm fortunate enough to where, I can do fire stuff. My dad's been in the financial world for quite some time. So that looks pretty appealing as well, to be able to help people out with their financial goals. So I'm not really sure. I just know that it's going to come pretty quick in the next few months. And just going back to basic last week, and I got to go to the fire academy a couple weeks ago to go spend some time with them. It's really been an emotional ride towards the end as I start to reflect that, hey, man, it's coming to an end. So I plan on taking an entire 6 weeks off of doing, when I said get grounded for a minute ago and get all the noise of the world out of your system. I really, for 6 weeks, I want to get off the grid. I want to just be with my thoughts and really just unpack what 25 years in the military did. And before I get started with the next. So I look forward to that.
That's awesome. 4 months is going to fly by. I'm super excited for you that you're getting some of those really capstone moments where you're to cherish those for the rest of your life. That's awesome. I'd like to give you a final takeaway, final message. What do you want listeners to take from the whole 54 minutes?
I mean, at the end of the day, I wouldn't beat yourself up if if you feel like you're not a resilient person. I don't want that special warfare guy to see this by chance and be like, oh, he said I quit. Like, maybe I saw you in a bad moment, like, I don't know what led to that moment. Maybe you have 5,000 other moments to that point. So I'm never here to judge anybody. I'm not, if you're not tough enough today to take that first step on the track, that's okay. I'm not here to say, I expect more of you or you should have taken that step. But I hope you think about taking it tomorrow. And, what does that look like as you continue your journey? So everyone's different. Like I said, I was super fortunate. I love that analogy about the paper plates. And I think that's one thing that we have to understand too, as we talk about resilience. And maybe for me or you, if we look at it as a buzzword, maybe we just don't have enough paper plates that we've experienced. So for us to take away from some of our folks that we think maybe need to build resiliency skills, well, maybe we need to understand them a little bit more as well. So that's a very, very good point that I'm taking away. But Again, you're not always going to nail it today, but reflect, take your time, do some of that soul searching, and the next time you're afforded the opportunity, take that step.
Awesome. Yeah, those are good words. I encourage listeners to let me know how things are going, thoughts, questions, anything on social media. We got the audio podcast on Buzzsprout or anywhere you receive your audio podcasts, and then we'll have the videos up on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming out, sir.
All right, we'll see
you. And as
you.
always, I love you all. See ya.
All right, later.